Well, I don't know if anyone will recognize that, but it was the theme song to Kill a Mockingbird. Hello, Charles.
Hello
Welcome
there,
to
Jason.
Closing In. And Tom, pleasure to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us here. Of course, our guest today, Tom Lipscomb, the living legend. We're so delighted to have you here.
Glad to be living.
So Charles, today we're closing in. We've got Tom with us. Tom, would you like to start by giving our audience a little bit of background so that they know exactly who we're dealing with here?
Well, I'm an editor, came up through college publishing and then into bestseller publishing, ran a couple of big publishing houses, had a magazine group, including Ladies Home Journal and Red Book, broadcast group, 2 book publishing companies reporting to me. Then I went to the New York Times. They had a really bad publishing company, which I turned around and renamed Times Books. Then I got into digital media because what got me concerned was how do you get paid when you write something in digital media? With books, you have to buy the book or you've got to Xerox it, which is even more expensive. How do you do it digitally when you can just go bip and you copied it? So I came up with a couple of patents in that area, set up one company, then another company, took them both public. And anyway, I've been in the digital area since then, and writing as a journalist and as a commentator as well as a news-making journalist in a number of areas.
When would you say that you got involved in the digital aspect? Was it prior to 2000? Or?
Yeah, it was prior to 2000. My sister's responsible. She worked at IBM. And she basically said, you've got to learn about computers. And I said, I hate computers. Because at that point I'm thinking of this, what was this little board thing that was so expensive, Texas Instruments, and very complicated, all these funny signals all over, it looked like something from outer space. So I said, okay, I'll do what I did in the Army. I said, what's that? I'll build one. So I went over to Brooklyn and to Long Island City and got memory chips in a long tube, and I got drives and an empty box, a fan over here, and I put it all together.
Really?
And when I turned it on, a C prompt came up.
Wow. How did you know how to do that?
I followed Joe Chink instructions, which weren't easy because they were in pidgin English. But basically, it taught me how bloody simple computers really are. A lot faster than sitting around learning how to program in some high school class. And I said, this is going to really be something. This is really simple. Everybody can, if I can build a computer, you know, having almost flunked physics, anybody can get involved in this. So that's how I got involved in it. And I began to look at protecting intellectual property in digital form immediately, because that's what publishers do. We protect intellectual property and try and get authors paid for it.
Amazing. Well, it would be interesting. I don't know if this is a topic that would interest you, but I'd be really interested in discussing for a minute the economics of publishing and your experience with that. And
well, now, publishing is like media.
Right.
Okay. Media is like a bag of golf clubs.
Right.
So you don't discuss a bag of golf clubs. You talk about your shot, your lie, and you pick a club. Pick a club.
So let's talk about let's talk about hardback books. Like for today, for example, last night there was Greg Jarrett and Janine Pirro were both on one of the shows, and they each, as it turned out, lay claim to being the New York number one bestseller nonfiction.
The first thing you need to know is who their publisher is.
Janine was Hachette, that I know.
Hachette, okay.
Yeah. I don't know Joe.
Okay, well, it matters because there are a couple of ways of playing the game. One way of playing the game, Regnery is famous for. What they do is they poop out huge quantities of books at a very low royalty rate based on bulk sales. And what this means is instead of getting 10, 12, or 15% of list price, the author gets like 7% of the net price, not the list, which means it's a lot cheaper. And so you would get a bestseller by flooding the marketplace. On the other hand, the other model is harder because you get paid, probably if you're a good author like I'm sure these two are, you get 10, 12, 15% breakpoints, 5,000, 7,500, 10,000 copies of the list price. So if it's $29, you figure it out, it's what, $5 a book. That's a nice number. Then, but to make a bestseller on a nonfiction book like that, you've got to get about 75,000 placed. That doesn't mean they're sold yet, but they're placed. And then you got to sell a certain velocity of those.
So a hardback book, nonfiction that sold 50,000 copies with full freight for the author is a success? Or?
Well, it depends on if he sold final sale 50,000 copies at $5 a piece. What's that, $250,000 gross? Okay, that's not bad. But it's not a big bestseller either. I've had bestsellers that sold 1.5 million copies.
Wow.
$250,000 doesn't move the needle in the Ortel world.
I had one book that was number one on the bestseller list for a year in hardcover and another year in softcover.
Wow.
How was the sales success of the Pentagon Papers? I'm fascinated by that.
Well, it actually sold better in softcover than it did in hardcover. The book started out, the Pentagon Papers started out as a brilliant idea of a guy named Oscar Distel at Bantam. He's one of the great pioneers in the business. Oscar's daughter, Jane, was the famous agent for Barack Obama, whose brochure about Barack Obama had him as a well-known Kenyan.
Right, wow.
So we came out with a softcover deal, and it sold like mad because who wants to read it? Young people, college courses. Millions of copies went out in softcover, but as a hardcover book, it probably never sold more than 50,000 copies. And to this day, as its publisher, I still can't prove anyone's ever read it.
Right. And was it the Pentagon Papers itself or the fallout from its publication that revealed the CIA program Operation Mockingbird?
An awful lot of stuff fell out, rather like we're seeing with the stuff coming out on this whole Russian collusion thing. We're finding letters lead to questions that lead to witnesses that lead to testimony. It's the same sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Mockingbird was a fallout. And Mockingbird's never been proven, by the way. We do know, anybody who's been in journalism knows damn well there have been CIA attempts to use journalists as cover in all kinds of situations. The idea that intelligence agencies want to get their word out, that's what intelligence agencies do, for heaven's sakes, locally and internationally. So something like that makes perfectly good sense. The idea, we had, for example, a big CIA push during the Cold War through the Congress on Cultural Freedom and the American Student Association. These were all totally against the law activities of the CIA, hardening American institutions, in their opinion, and international institutions against communist subversion, okay? So there's nothing new about intelligence agencies acting in the civil society and things they think are in the national interest.
But when you say that it hasn't been proven, wasn't it acknowledged and admitted during the Church Committee hearings?
Well, yes, but not much. And look, how many words can you say about Mockingbird in the Church Committee hearings?
I don't know.
Who testified at length about Mockingbird? Give me a news story about Operation Mockingbird from any major paper. There weren't any.
Well, but obviously
now it's a big deal on the people who like to go back and throw dusty pieces of yellow paper in the air to prove that they've always been doing this and that East Asia has always been at war with Oceania. It's now part of an entire mindset. But at the time, it wasn't regarded as a big deal. The big deal in the Church Committee was finding out about the assassination activities, okay, and things that we didn't have any idea they were doing.
Certainly the average American didn't have any idea that the CIA would have infiltrated major news media and have had any substantial influence over its direction. Do you think that's happening nowadays?
Oh, nowadays, of course. What have we just learned? But that if we've got a PR office operating hand in hand with Bruce Orr, okay, at the Department of Justice, it's going, yes, now we've got, and also in coordination with news organizations that are being briefed through this entire process. I mean, that's an intelligence agency's wet dream. Mockingbird is a microbe compared to the brontosaurus of that activity.
And by that you mean specifically private companies that are able to execute these sorts of things kind of outside the regulation of these agencies?
Well, agencies have always used cover in private organizations. And that was one of the big things about Valerie Plame. You know, what did she really do? Was she an operative? No. She was more a cover employee, and there are lots of those.
Interesting.
You know, one of the things I'm struck by is somebody who used to work for a small investment bank that did have far-flung international operations.
Sure.
We employed two people who were somewhat legendary formerly in the CIA. There was Van Galbraith and Evan Galbraith, who's passed away, and Dino Pianzio, who was, I think, the head of worldwide covert operations for the CIA, and nobody at Dillon Reed seemed to care too much about what those guys were actually doing, and that always struck me as interesting.
Well, I think we were still living in the twilight of the Cold War, which was still living in the twilight of the great bipartisan world of World War II. So basically, if someone said, "I'm from the government and I wonder if you could do something to help us," everybody would spring to attention and wave the flag and figure they were doing something good for America. Now, things have changed a lot.
Well, what was interesting to me about that kind of stuff is at least Dillon Reed was regulated. It was a financial institution that had to comply with U.S. and foreign laws doing what we were doing. And now I see this proliferation of firms like Teneo and Downer's firm Hackwood and all these other firms that are collections of, it seems to me, former government officials with murky links around the world that don't necessarily follow the law of any single country, who are doing projects, you know, where they get paid lots of money, but there's no real standard to say that, you know, Tom Lipscomb, Charles Ortel, and Jason Goodman, we should get $10 million for an introduction, as opposed to the kind of rigorous standards that existed back when I was doing that kind of work.
I think we've had a total collapse in civic probity all over the world, not just the United States. If you look at the members of Congress in, say, 1970, and you look at the net worth statements, there are members of Congress today whose entire net worth is larger than the entire Congress in 1970.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, where did that money come from? In the early days, one of the great scandals was LBJ. LBJ's big scandal was he'd gotten an FCC license for stations in Texas and TV and radio in his wife's name. And that was the basis of LBJ's fortune.
Wow.
Which is barely measurable today.
I thought he also sold a lot of crappy land that was in Lady Bird's name to build the Johnson Space Center.
I'm sure whatever penny ante stuff on top of that he would do. But that's basically, he made his money off broadcast. So today, the intertwining and the double dealing and the levels, I mean, let's look at the Manafort case, which is quite interesting. The government was making quite a big stink about the fact that he was keeping money overseas and then loaning himself some of the money, okay, and not declaring it as income, which is exactly what corporations and individuals have been doing since all history that I know of. You didn't have to regard it as income until you know, we're going to acknowledge it, pay it back, or do something, make a final transaction. And this gets stretched out with the help of lawyers and accountants as long as possible. Nothing weird about any of this, yet it's treated as a major scandal because, why? Because there are two levels of law in the United States. There's one for the rich and one for the poor. Disraeli made that point back in the 1840s when he wrote a book called Two Nations. Nothing new about this. What's new about it is in the United States.
Yeah, that to me, the Manafort case is particularly egregious because I think the beginning of it, the launching of it,
Yeah.
was launched on a false premise.
Yeah.
I mean, and so everything else, it seems to me, if Mueller was not, in my view, legitimately appointed,
Yeah.
then why are we burning taxpayer money on this?
Well,
exercise?
that's the president's
Yeah.
responsibility. He can bring it to an end tomorrow. Why he doesn't is an interesting field for speculation.
Great. Well, now, Jason, we've rushed into this actually with jumping ahead. We haven't given our standard disclaimer.
That's true.
Maybe
I
we should do a little
apologize
bit
for
of
that, Charles.
That's
Let
all
me-
right. And then I
Yeah,
want
before anybody invests any money, you better.
we put Tom Lipscomb's contact information up here because he's one of these rare people who is not on Twitter.
Right.
He's also not shadow banned on Twitter. The
That's
way
right.
It turns out that you and I are both shadow banned.
Right.
That's for another day. We're not
Perhaps
going to take that.
someday we'll delve into that.
Yeah, we
a
might
bit
delve
more.
into that. But Tom is very good on email. If people need to contact him, I hope you won't mind.
No, it's all right.
This is how you do it. And if we go right to the next page, we
Sure.
like to remind people that we do live in a wonderful country where we have First Amendment rights. And so we are allowed to express our opinions, and we try to make sure we do so with reference to hard facts that we then give people a chance to check for themselves. So we like it. We like it when people give us constructive suggestions. I do get them almost every day. The ways to reach me are on here, and Jason. That is to say, if you can get through the shadow ban on Twitter.
That's right.
We might just put up the playlist, though, Jason.
Yeah,
'cause
the playlist is definitely a convenient way for people to look through the, Quinn Michaels will be upset, 93. Luckily, today is the 94th video, so we'll be done with that. You know, Charles, I don't know if we want to take too much time out of our session here with Tom, but of course, this episode of Sunday with Charles has been, I can't even play it now because we'll get another copyright notice from CBS on this video.
Is that right?
Well, I mean, yeah, because I made a video about how I thought it was really overreaching for CBS to monetize this video on their behalf because of a parody we made of Mission Impossible. And I feel like this is a subtle way that corporate giants like Google can take away our free speech. Obviously, they've created a system here where they hope that we'll monetize this work through ads on YouTube. And of course, if they violate the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and allow CBS to earn money off of our protected parody, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but eliminating the faces of the actors, changing the original soundtrack, changing the meaning of the scene for political parody is specifically protected under fair use with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Yes, except for the fact that with the court system in the United States is like a mirror drop from 10,000 feet. It reflects whatever it's next to when the pieces land. So you can't really look in very many cases. And if you're interested in delving into this, I suggest you talk to Charles Glaser, who's quite intelligent about this entire area.
Well, I might seek legal opinions just to educate myself and our viewing audience, but certainly I'm not going to engage in any kind of legal battle with CBS. That would be about as smart as trying to beat up the 10th precinct of
Well,
the
in
New York
a
Police
digital
Department.
world, it is so easy to copy
Right.
and to, in effect, what shall we say? You're like the people who live in empty apartments in London. You're
Digital
gypsying.
squatters.
You're squatting on other people's rights. And when this is really honest to God parody, and when it's a ripoff of a trademark or brand, is a judgment call. It isn't.
Right.
It isn't real simple. So there are probably steps you can take to broaden the parody level beyond any misunderstanding.
Well, it's an interesting concept to explore. And again, it's a lawyer friend of mine used to say that Charlie Chaplin did not win the Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest, meaning no matter how good you might think your case is in a particular matter, you never know what the outcome will be. And certainly in a copyright claim, each case and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act would be considered individually, but I feel very strongly that this is an overreach. There is no third-party arbitrator that decides. I literally challenged CBS's monetizing of our video, and YouTube sent me an email saying that CBS reviewed this and they think their claim is okay.
Yeah, well, somewhere there's a 28-year-old kid recently out of law school whose job it is to monetize every tangential use of rights CBS might claim, and you are going to get to meet him.
Well, they're not stating that they're going to take any legal action against me. They're just monetizing this video. So again, it's a subtle way that YouTube and Google and CBS can suppress our ability to get a message out there through freedom of speech rights that are supposed to be
protected. I think you're taking a step too far. I don't see it as being a plot by anybody. I see it as just big, dumb, stupid corporate, stepping on your foot because it can. And the other big damn corporation, Google, is making damn sure that CBS hasn't got any cause to fight with them. And so you get squished. This is the world we're in. I don't think, they don't have to plot. They do that when they wake up in the morning accidentally.
I didn't mean to imply that I feel it's a plot. I just think they've set up the rules in their favor, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah,
but
they run the casino.
Enough of that. It's their casino.
That's
but
right.
People can watch all of these Sunday with Charles videos, and the Charles Ortel is closing in videos by coming to this playlist.
You know what's not clear is what the address is people go to for this. You act like we all know. I don't know. I have no idea what the address is.
Thank you for bringing that up, Tom. People can get us on YouTube, of course, by searching for Crowdsource the Truth. They can join us on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, where people can actually sponsor the show. And that type of distribution of sponsorship is a stark difference to what CBS or YouTube or the New York Times or any of these large companies are doing, where mega million-dollar brands sponsor their mega million-dollar shows, and then they get to make all these rules like we think you're violating our copyright, etc.
Well, I'm a publisher and I like to sell. So if you make a card with that information on it, rather than pass it off when you say it, it'll help, because then I can see it, I can write it down, and I can click on it.
That's excellent advice. I will do that.
Okay.
So back to the slides, Charles.
So if we could go to the next page. Yeah, now this, maybe make the type a little bit bigger. The one thing Tom was too modest about, probably many things, but one thing was this project you've been working on involving Rudolf Hess. And I wonder if you could take a few minutes and just tell our audience about it, because I find it fascinating.
One thing you do as a publisher is you're getting hundreds of manuscripts a year with various propositions. Did Hitler really die in the wreckage, or did he get away to Brazil? Did the Hindenburg blow up from a lightning strike, or did the Hindenburg get sabotaged? A million things. One of the things so things occur to you as you go through life. Well, I had a funny situation happen to me. I was at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the big annual meeting of book publishers in Frankfurt, Germany. And I get a phone call from the UPI bureau chief, a guy named Wellington Long, one of the great journalists of all time, the dean of European foreign affairs. And he says, "Tom, can you get to Berlin?" And I say, "Yeah, I can get to Berlin, but I'm busy trying to make a living here in Frankfurt selling rights to my books to all these foreign publishers. If I come there, I take a day out of this trip." He said, "I think you need to come here." I said, "And you can't tell me over the phone why?" He said, "No." So, okay. Not only do I fly to Berlin, but it's raining buckets. I mean, we're talking about 3 inches a minute. I get to meet Wellington Long, and he introduced me to the governor of Spandau Prison. He's an American. and an American out of military uniform. The American governor was a colonel in the army, but he wasn't where he was in mufti. And he looked like, I mean, a army officer in his civilian clothes is really a sad sight. This guy not only was a sad sight, he was a wet hen. I mean, everything was coming out all over the place. And he said, I said, well, what is it, sir, that you've got? He said, well, I'm the only prisoner in Spandau I can think of, said I, was Rudolf Hess. He's the last guy in there, right? And the governor said, yes. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to sell you Rudolf Hess's book. Well, make a long story short, in a couple of months, the army found out what this clown was doing, abusing his official position to try and make money off the only prisoner left in Spandau, and he was thrown out of there. I go back to the States. But what began to hit my mind is I just started to think about the Hess case. Here was the deputy Reichsfuhrer, Hitler's deputy Fuhrer, who'd flown to England in 1941 when England was mashed flat. Its whole entire army had been kicked out in Dunkirk. They had nothing going on. And the deputy Reich flies to Scotland and claims he wants to talk peace. And the British put out a statement saying, the poor guy, you know, he wanted to talk peace with us. He arrives. He said he came on his own. He had no authority. And so we, in effect, clapped him in irons, and we're going to hold him until the trials after the war. It didn't work for me. And the reason was, I said, the plane he flew, according to everybody, would have run out of gas by the time it got from Munich to the English Channel. He had to have refueled. If he refueled, it couldn't be a secret mission that nobody knew about. Everybody knows this. This is a whole plot. So I began to dig into it. Anyway, the upshot is I've discovered what Rudolf Hess's mission was about, what the deal was, and I found to my surprise that the worst mistake Winston Churchill made wasn't Gallipoli. It was not taking the peace offer Hess brought to England.
But the upshot, though, I think, is that you're working on
A book.
a book.
Yep. Hitler's Secret Peace Mission.
Wow. When will that be out?
Oh, 18 months.
18 months, wow.
Sounds fascinating.
Great.
Is there any more you can tell us about it?
That's enough.
Okay.
So if we go back to that
Yes.
page there for a sec. Yeah. Tom it might be interesting for you to tell us a little bit about some of these authors you published. There are a lot of great names up here. Agatha Christie, for one, I really enjoyed her work.
Well, there are two kinds. When you run publishing companies, you get who they've already published. It's called the backlist. And one company I took over as editor-in-chief, and I had everybody from Maeterlinck's The Bluebird to Winston Churchill, Agatha Christie, Zane Grey. My God, these legends are all there. And then it's your job to get new authors that you can put on the bestseller list and keep the money flowing in. And the balance is very hard to do. So my job as a publisher was to find marketable authors and do a hell of a good job publicizing what they did and making sure they hit the marketplace. Publishers are lousy at selling books. They're great at announcing large sums of money they've paid for them, but you never hear what happened.
That truly amazes me, actually. As a longtime book lover, I'm amazed that in that business, and maybe it's just like other aspects of the entertainment business, that the artists never really know, the creators know, how much money was made off of their content.
Well, as I point out to literary agents, the author actually makes more money historically on the book publications than the publisher.
Is that right?
The average net profit of publishing companies runs around 4 to 5%.
Whoa.
Now think of a high cost of money period like the late 70s.
Right.
I mean, you're losing your ass, right? But the author's getting 12 or 15% of list price.
Huh.
So here is it's a stupid business. Matter of fact, when the New York Times was trying to hire me to run their company, they said, if you were us, what would you do with this publishing? And I said, get rid of it.
Burn it.
They said, well, yes, but why we're talking about your running? And I said, no, I'd get rid of it tomorrow. The thing bleeds money. You could take the money out of it if some sucker would buy it from you because it's the New York Times publishing company. I said, you could put it in a radio station and make a fortune. I said, this is an earnings per share business, right? They said, yeah. I said, but will you run it for us? I said, well, okay.
Well, isn't there a model, though, that you take the book, probably more fiction than nonfiction, you take the book
Is there a model for being the World Series winner in baseball one year and not being in the cellar the next year?
No, I was going to say, you take the book and you turn it into a movie. Take a book, movie.
No, you don't, because who owns the book to turn it into a movie? The publisher? No.
Who does own it? The author?
Usually the author through his literary agent. And the literary agent probably retains another literary agent to sell the movie rights.
Mm-hmm.
So the publisher is the last to know. The only reason we want to know if the book's been sold to movies is because the paperback auction would be higher if you had a movie sale.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, you've been really active through lots of different iterations of publication from, you've spoken to us about radio broadcasting, television broadcasting,
Yep.
print media, and now the internet.
Yep.
Do you feel that things like Amazon.com and Kindle publishing, has this changed the publishing industry with the regard to the financial aspects you're discussing?
Well, there are, certainly it's changed because basically it used to be that three main wholesalers did like 80% of the retail marketplace. And having an Amazon in there, even Barnes & Noble with its direct mail, changes all that. The ebooks thing is getting to be respectable, but basically there's a lot changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
How do you mean?
Well, for example, we have, as we have in the rest of the culture, we have an entire group of media operators who are coming up out of the colleges and universities. They, for all practical purposes, are religious zealots. They don't care anything about markets, they care about what's good for us. Okay, and they want to basically turn publishing into tract publishing. Religious tracts, like how diversity can make your company more profitable, or any number of social justice warrior causes, which may or may not have a response in the marketplace. Now, I'm no one, you'll have to get out of my way if you find something that will sell that I can't get my hands on and sell it in the marketplace, so I'm not against this. It's just when you have either all publishing becomes Baptist or environmentally conscious, or when you begin to kill the real trick of publishing. Publishing is an unscheduled feast in which you go into a store, say, looking for a truffle sandwich. But if you can't find one, you're likely to walk out with an omelet because it's got variety up the kazoo, okay? You can go into any bookstore and come out with something you're going to like. You may buy it on discount. You may buy it full list price. You may buy it because you like the way the stack was set up in the front of that made it look really hot, and you want to be the first person in your neighborhood to read it. But there are lots of different things going on. When they all come from one direction, it's got to depress sales.
But I think what I meant was the fact that this digital publishing, I mean, someone could self-publish a book now. It's almost...
Sure you can, but how do you get anybody to know about it?
Right. Well,
it's no different than garage music.
Well, it's no different than what we're doing right here, producing a video broadcast in my apartment. And
if you cannot reach publicity, then you have a tiny little marketplace that you iterate very slowly and get slightly larger until you may get lucky and two of the little blips of rain on the windshield merge together and you have a bigger blip until you get a sheet of rain. But it takes a long time.
right.
The reality is publishing, music marketing, any number of media marketing have depended upon the ability to reach audience. And what's happening today, unlike the 20th century was the age of mass marketing. Everybody got to look for cost per thousand, we're looking for big marketplaces. Today it's micromanaging, micro markets, and how do you work with markets? That's all you can reach because the mass markets have lost all of this authenticity.
Well, look at someone like Alex Jones, who maybe 20 years ago started out on a public access radio station, just one guy speaking into a microphone.
Yep.
Today he's mentioned by, a major candidate for president. He's on the cover of all the newspapers for being banned from the largest internet outlets. It, in many ways, feels like these large corporate entities that have, legacy control of these markets, they don't want the drops to merge on the windshield and an Alex Jones to emerge.
I don't think that, I don't see him in those terms. I see Alex Jones more like a Jimmy Swaggart. He's a revivalist, okay? These guys have their little flocks, and they sell their little flocks everything they damn well can, and they grow their flock as fast as they can, and those with a gift of public appearances can grow faster. All the usual multiples of what it takes to create a movement or a cult. Nothing wrong with it, whether you're transported to outer space, or you've got Alex Jones, or whatever. There's always been room for revivals on one figure or another. That's all I see Alex Jones as being. There's nothing particularly interesting about him, except that he's been tromped on, I think unfairly, but then again, so have all the people in the Me Too movement, not one of which has gone to trial until finally Harvey Weinstein. These people have lost their jobs, they've lost millions and millions of dollars. We're in a world right now in which the Red Queen rules. Sentence first, trial afterwards.
Right, of course. So you don't feel that independent media and people like Alex Jones have brought issues to the fore that mainstream corporate financed media would never touch?
Nope.
No?
Nope. I was running the New York Times publishing company, and I found one of these revival guys named Howard Ruff out in Utah. Okay. And he had a newsletter of about 125,000. He had an annual meeting. And he created, with me, the greatest financial bestseller in history.
Which one was that? I remember the name.
How to Prosper During the Coming Bad Years.
Oh, right, yeah. Whatever happened?
Corporate America can't wait to get its hands on somebody like this. Okay? Except for the fact all the kiddies coming from the seminaries that used to be colleges and universities won't touch anything that doesn't fit their little catechisms with an 11-foot pole. Used to be awful people like me didn't care as long as we could find a market. I would publish Che Guevara one day and Alex Jones the next. Wouldn't bother me a whit. I was looking for a market with an interesting thesis that the market wanted to hear, and I could make money off it. That's what publishers are supposed to do.
I'm sure there must be an answer to this question. Maybe you don't want to tell us, but is there any book proposal that you turned down that you really regret having turned down because somebody else took it, ran with it, and made it a big success?
You mean how many hundred? Want to hear a story?
That's why I asked the question.
Well, I'm sitting in my office one day, and my secretary says, there's a gal in the outer office and her agent, and they wanted to see you. And I said, let me take a peek. So I go take a look, and here's this very fat woman sitting out there with her agent, who's a good agent. And I said, oh no. I said, do I have to, who is this gal? I said, she's a medical writer from Boston. Very good medical writer. I said, well, what's she trying to sell? I said, she's trying to sell a novel. I said, like Robin Cook, Coma? What kind of novel is she trying to sell? It's a story about a woman at the 19th century in Australia who's in love with her priest. I said, get her out of here. The old woman in love with her priest story, I've seen it 100 times. So I said goodbye to the Thornbirds. By the way, I came to love the author. Her books on Julius Caesar and his era are absolutely superb.
Well, why don't we switch gears a little bit and go to the next page?
Sure.
And we've got a whole list of topics to cover with Tom. We haven't really given him much of a heads up in terms of what the questions are, so forgive me for doing this. This is not meant to be ambush. But looking forward, Tom, I mean, you have the perspective of several decades being in this business at a high level. It's changed a lot. I remember in 1980 when I started at work, I would read at least 4 newspapers a day, at least in full. I'd read countless magazines.
Sure.
I haven't read a newspaper in full in years.
Yep.
You know, how do you see this moving forward? Do you think, can the New York Times stay relevant, the Wall Street Journal stay relevant? Or
Well, there's a central problem that was pointed out of all people by that kid who worked for Obama. His statement about young journalists not knowing squat, where his brother was head of CBS, I think.
Oh, that's right.
What's the name?
Ben Rhodes.
What's the name?
Ben Rhodes was the guy.
Ben Rhodes, yeah. Ben Rhodes points out that you can tell them anything and they'll believe you because they've got no education, no knowledge of the world. We've had a major change, which is directly relevant to this. Michael Walsh has a wonderful column out on PJ Media, in which he reminds us that you didn't just go to the New York Times. You would start out on some dusty paper like the Charlotte Observer, and you'd work there for a couple of years, then you'd get to maybe the New York Times on the city desk, and you go down the court, police, where there are 26 reporters and 3 chairs, and you'd sweat it down there in the one phone line. You put your time in and you learn. Now we've got this little girl, Sarah Jean, 4 years out of law school, and she's going on the editorial board of the New York Times. Based on what? I looked into it. She's written only 2 articles I can find.
2 articles? That's more
2.
than 1.
Well, 2 articles. This girl's on the editorial board. 2 articles, one for the New York Times Magazine, and the other article is really a book, 90-page long ebook she did for Forbes, which is now out of print. Everything else are blogs and Twitter.
Hairstyles.
Well, but it tells you, okay, Ben Rhodes is right in spades. And what's the net effect of it? We just saw it. We saw the press, full court press, New York Times, Washington Post, a whole bunch of them, down on Trump. Why? Well, we have the former director of national intelligence calling Trump a traitor. Okay. We've got the former head of the CIA saying he was treasonous and all kinds of stuff, and all this being ballyhooed in the papers. Unbelievable. So plus we've got Stormy Daniels. Okay, and we've got the Manafort trial, which is going to do it all. And the net effect, Trump got the highest ratings at 50% he's ever gotten. Yeah. Now, that's phenomenal example of non-influence of press. Okay, so the net effect of having all these non-entities working as reporters is that they're not getting any news. Okay, they aren't really covering anything that anyone's paying any attention to. Yeah. And a guy like Trump is just going against the wind in a way that we've never seen in American politics.
Like I don't know, you probably remember this, there used to be in the median on Park Avenue, on
Yep.
48th Street, 49th Street, there used to be a guy with a Jesus Christ beard who
yelling and
and screaming like this for
Yep.
4 hours a day.
Yep.
You know,
I never saw that guy.
he was just at the top of his lungs. I don't know how he did it. And that's the mainstream press. I mean, that's CNN, that's MSNBC. That's some of these snowflake teachers.
Well, as you said, we used to read a lot of papers. We had Ed Fancher's Village Voice, which is a terrific power. Okay.
Is that gone, the Village Voice?
Yeah, it's a long story. Well, I'll spare you. We had the East Village Other, which was great fun to read. Okay. We had German papers. We had Chinese papers. We had Jewish papers. We had a lot of papers. And they've all disappeared. Now the Daily News is disappearing finally.
Thank God.
Not that anybody, well,
I'll
take it over the nothing, you know. I'm the guy who, sitting at the breakfast table, read the back of the cereal box. I've got to have something to read. Of course, that's my generation too. But the reality is there's very little influence. I haven't seen a Sunday talk show, and I can't tell you how long.
How about Sunday with Charles?
Oh, Charles is fine. I mean, I'd rather watch Charles' podcast than Meet the Press.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Okay.
Well, it's some of the best programming on a screen.
Well, it's a lot better programming, and I don't have to worry about basically having a Democratic Party functionary acting as a journalist, which I would hate just as much if it was Karl Rove. And so basically, the American people It's like you say about the stocks, that the market prices stocks fully, even though the news hasn't gone out yet, it's baked into the price at the time you see it. Same thing with news now.
Right.
We've baked in the reality that we accept, and it doesn't matter what the PR comes out in the news, it doesn't affect what the American people think.
On the other hand, what I have noticed with Jason's idea here in Crowdsource the Truth, what it does is, I think, very different on a smaller level by far than the New York Times. You've managed, I think, Jason, to excite interest in the viewership in actually trying to move the needle on issues of importance of a given debate or moment, now in the election looking forward. And I think you're able to do that a lot more quickly and effectively than the New York Times can do, than the Wall Street Journal can do.
Well, as a publisher, I think the same, I may be wrong, but I think the same applies. 1 out of 5 books makes money, the other 4 lose money. The 5th book has to make enough money to carry all the others, okay? Frankly, in this business, I wouldn't do a whole bunch of programs. I'd do 1 or 2 or 3, which I do a bunch to begin with and narrow them down. And I'd put all my energy into a very few, because it's a pounds per square inch business. It's narrow markets, but a lot of PSI, you'll drive through, get bigger numbers faster. I don't think that having 15 balls up in the air is better than having 3 with 5 times the effect.
No, that's fair enough.
Right.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But this kind of approach, Tom, I think of being able to get our content together, say, 2 hours before we go on air, as opposed to the way they do it in the big shows, to be able to have constant communication with the audience, to have the audience feel that they can actually get through and make an impact. And then the word of mouth. We had I don't know if you know Neil Austrian, but Neil Austrian was a partner at Dillon Read, about 15, 20 years older than I am. And he had been head of Doyle Dane Bernbach, the advertising agency, and Dillon Read was very much against advertising. You just say, about 5 years before I got there, the story goes, we didn't have business cards. Because the idea was, if you didn't know how to reach us, we didn't want to do business with you. And so I looked at that, I said, this is not right. You know, we really need to start marketing our successes. So I asked this guy, Neil Austrian, to give us a view of, what he would recommend. Should we spend money on advertising, yes or no? And he said, the best form of advertising is word of mouth. And I could tell you in my...
Absolutely true. In the book business as well.
Yeah.
We can't afford to advertise. Space advertising costs a bloody fortune.
Right.
Okay, which is why you don't see any. Authors scream, where's my ad in the New York Review of Books? And we say, we're not going to run one. Why? I said, because we'd rather spend the money putting together radio show segments we can send out to 26 different news shows around the country.
Right.
That's more efficient. So yes, anything that creates word of mouth.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of my mentors was a guy named Saul Stein, who ran Stein and Day. And Saul had been around in the entertainment business, and he talked Ilya Kazan into writing a novel. So Ilya Kazan wrote the arrangement, and it goes very nicely. Good laydown, looks good, but how we make a bestseller of it? So Kazan gets him on the Johnny Carson show. It's a big deal. So he goes to Saul, what should I say? Should I talk about working with Natalie Wood and in Splendor in the Grass? Should I talk about Streetcar? God, no. Here's what you do. Johnny, that's a good question you just asked me, but I've got one for you. Why do I get hundreds of letters complaining that the sex scene on page 357 is the sexiest thing they've ever read in print? I don't understand it. The next day there are lines around the block in every bookstore in America. #1 bestseller a week later.
There you go.
It's the oldest marketing campaign
And that's
in the
what
world.
we call word of mouth, right?
Right. So you're going to do, 60 Shades of Crowdsource the Truth?
That's a good idea. I think part of the reason that it's working is that I'm not one of these types of people who sits around coming up with business plans and identifying markets. I just was sort of getting so
Well, you
fed
would
up.
be if there was anything in it for you. But
Well-
you can't reach if you did that, you would end up having to raise financing
Right,
of $100 million
Right.
just to test.
right.
And then somebody's got to come along for stage 2 for mezzanine financing. You don't want to get involved in all that. You've
Correct.
got issues moving rapidly through your life, and this is a better way of playing it. I agree.
Well, and what I did was I became so frustrated with the way that news was being reported, and I looked at, my capabilities and how I was operating. I said, let me get rid of all these expensive, Hollywood movie cameras, and I realized that this type of technology would allow me to do a fairly sophisticated
it's
type
amazing.
of production for very little money.
It's really amazing what you're able to do. And once again, the economics now allow micro broadcasting, what people haven't figured out yet, and gee whiz, it hasn't been that long, right? They haven't figured out how to make it grow faster.
Right.
And let me know when you do. I'll be fascinated to watch.
Well, we're doing the grassroots thing, and like you said, word of mouth, and we're dealing with some of the challenges. Like we see Alex Jones and InfoWars getting pushed off these major platforms. It would be very easy for something like that to happen to Crowdsource the Truth, and within one day.
I don't think so. I mean, so far I haven't seen any alien subduction scenarios coming down here explaining why we haven't seen Malia and her sister lately. Okay, I mean, Alex Jones is really out there on the fringe. Okay, when you start with the moon landing didn't happen, or 9/11 was a plot, and you go into that world, you risk your credibility. I'm not saying we can be utterly amazed at what the truth may be behind any number of things, okay? This is not the proper forum for it. You go out there and get your facts straight first. I did the best book on the JFK assassination, but it was more than 15 years after the assassination, and there'd been many very irresponsible books about it in the interim, positing everything from the LBJ did it to the CIA did it to George Bush was in on it. With very little evidence and a lot of anecdotal material. So I think that responsible attacks on absolutely anything. Did FDR know about Pearl Harbor before it happened? That's fine, but there's a bridge too far in which you risk your credibility, your whole operation, for what? For a wild supposition? I don't think it's worth it.
What was the title of that JFK book?
It's called The Plot to Kill the President by Robert Blakey.
Oh, right.
Okay. Robert Blakey was the House Subcommittee on Assassinations General Counsel.
All right. So
and this came about, this House Subcommittee came about after Geraldo Rivera first ran the Zapruder tape on television.
Right.
The American people screamed like mad.
With the help of our mutual friend, Robert Groden.
Yes.
So you don't feel that, not to take this totally
That's
sideways,
okay.
you don't feel that Lyndon Johnson had any foreknowledge, or that the CIA had any involvement, or that the FBI was involved?
Nope, I go with the theory of our book. This was a mob hit, that the mob felt it had made a mistake in trying, remember, there's a wonderful scene, the film series that the Kennedys tried to kill that ended up going on Stars, I think it was Stars, on the Kennedys, which is really a terrific series that had great actors in it. And one of the great scenes was one in which Frank Sinatra comes to Joe Kennedy while the boys are in the White House and says, Joe, Sam Giancana is very unhappy. We delivered Chicago, we did what we said, and now your boys are after us. You've got to call this thing off. And Joe went to Bobby and to Jack and carried the message, at which point Bobby and Jack told their father he wasn't ever coming back to the White House. They sent him back to Hyannisport and he had a heart attack. Okay, big stuff. And I also arranged for the publication of a book by Jimmy Hoffa's lawyer, okay? And he was also the lawyer for the mob boss in Miami, forget his name. And he was there when he took a call from Sam Giancana announcing that they were going to do the hit on Kennedy.
Wow.
Well,
so this is a lot simpler. The mob got him. They had to stop it. The bleeding was too bad for the mob. They couldn't have this happen anymore. And the line that Frank came back to me with from his contact in Miami was, you know, if you're going to kill you shoot for the head.
Well, perhaps another day you and I can have a conversation specifically about
Sure.
this, but I know there's a lot more we want to
It just goes to show what you get out of journalism and what is responsible to look into and what's not responsible to look into. And by responsible, it doesn't mean actionable, it doesn't mean legally you can't do it, it doesn't mean your First Amendment doesn't grant you the right to do it. But I think if you're running a network or a distribution system, you're creating a brand by what you carry. And if you really want to say, look, we're just an open mic, anybody can come here and say anything they want to, that's one kind of brand. Another kind of brand may be, we're going to use some minimal controls, and here are the ground rules. That works for me too. What doesn't work is one in which the rules suddenly show up after the game is underway. Right. Okay, and that's what we're in now. And what's wrong with the current situation isn't that Alex Jones was kicked off the air. It's that he was kicked off the air like in the Me Too world, in which it's sentence first, trial afterwards.
Right.
And that is not what this country has ever been about, but it's all too frequently creeping into every area of our life today.
Isn't it really important for journalists and now bloggers and people who have any kind of reach to be questioning all of this? Do we really think that just 19 individuals who could barely speak English and didn't have jobs, rented apartments in the United States without guarantors and got onto planes and crashed them into the building with no outside assistance whatsoever?
Oh, I think we can question all kinds of things. I actually called the FBI, or not the FBI, the night of 9/11, I got information from the Philippines where Osama bin Laden's brother-in-law from Mindanao was, and I got the word through. Okay. I also knew about an entire building full of 2 floors of apartments on the east side, which had suddenly been vacated the night before, totally filled with Saudis, now all disappeared overnight. There's lots here. To go right back to the fact that the greatest scandal in the history of the Port Authority were the thousands of people impacted with mesothelioma as a result of the dust clouds full of asbestos dust that came down on 9/11, that Christy Whitman totally misinformed people and saying there was no risk. Of course there was risk. Terrible risk. What did it do? It basically gave cover to the New York Port Authority, which should be sued for billions of dollars by people who have no idea that what they're seeing are results of that dust cloud.
Christy Whitman is not one of my favorite people.
Well, her husband was a friend of mine at Citicorp.
Venture capital guy.
Johnny
right?
Whitman, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Do we want to talk about the Council on Foreign Relations at all? No.
Well, actually, I'd like to just stick to the script if it's okay. So one of the things that does keep me up late at night, not being able to go to sleep, and this is before I found out about being shadow banned.
Excuse me.
That's all right.
No problem. The shadow ban is keeping you up?
It's like,
I'm shutting it off.
oh, thank you. It was Mayor Giuliani, I think, who got a phone call in the middle of a press conference at one point, yeah. When he was
Perhaps
mayor.
it's Mayor Giuliani calling
Well,
now?
it could be. Or maybe he's, that new television show, Friended by God, is actually shooting today on my block. But
I don't know that.
anyway. So one of the things that keeps me up late at night is that,
I'd shut it off.
is that?
This is a Android product. You must understand that Google is at it again. I shut this off, right? It's off.
That's all right. So we've become, I think, very, very vulnerable to the whims of Facebook, Twitter, and Google. And one of the things I wonder about now, all this, whenever we hear Team Obama, Team Clinton, and the social justice warriors talk about actionable behavior, collusion, that's what they are doing, colluding. And I wonder if the deep state, high-tech world isn't setting us up for an even more odious version of 2016, and that is, we think we're having a real election in 2018, but in the last, say, 2 weeks, 10 days, there's going to be a slew of October surprises, all negative to incumbent Republicans. And then the people who might try to rebut that are going to be shut off from the internet.
I've spent, ever since Gary Sick showed up, what was that, the Reagan election, 1981? There have been October surprises.
Right.
I've yet to be surprised by one. I don't wait to be surprised by one. They're as likely to come from the Trump people as they are from the other side. So I don't worry much about it. I think we're in a world now in which most of these left-wing surprises are media-oriented.
Right.
The media is a dog that doesn't hunt. If the others come from the Trump side, I can see the impact of the Trump activities. I'd say head-to-head, Trump wins. Okay, if that's what we're talking about. So you don't have to be for one side or the other, but that's just how the balance of power is right now, it seems to me. Insofar as anything that might at the last minute affect the election, I think it goes for Team Trump, not against him.
Except Team Trump doesn't really control the pipes, doesn't control Google and Yahoo and Twitter
well,
and Facebook.
It seems to, I mean, it didn't control the press, right? Look at 2016. Nobody has quantified yet, and this is once again a fall down of our scholarship and journalism. Wouldn't you think somebody would have gone and analyzed the traffic on social media in the 2016 election and given us some idea how it played? I have no idea. Neither do you.
Yeah.
Okay, so why should I forecast for 2018 that it's going to be something quantifiable? The suppression is going to be so extensive. I think it's word of mouth. What my friends on Facebook tell me is going to be a lot more influential than anything Alex Jones has got to say.
I think you're right.
Or any of the other people that might be banned by. In other words, the targets to be picked by these malicious, putative Google, Facebook type people are not likely to be the ones that are likely to most affect. My Aunt Madge is likely to be more effective on me.
Right.
But what if Aunt Madge is sharing an Alex Jones video and now those are gone?
Aunt Madge will find something even weirder. You know, as we all know, our friends can find Your Newswire, one of my least favorite places. There are all these things out there. Moldova spends day and night creating new and more fascinating things to deal with. You know, is Trump from outer space? Don't worry, there'll be plenty of stuff that the kids, the 26-year-old recent graduates from Harvard, will not have gotten to in their attempt to shadow ban. They may get the big targets, like you two guys, but I don't see any hope that they're going to be able to do that kind of laying about.
Then on the other hand, you know, I think about the value of the information that I give up to a Twitter, give up to a Facebook, give up to a Google.
Yep.
And, you know, I may get some benefit, but it's nowhere near how much economic value the owners, the original owners of those companies have derived. And Elizabeth Warren, or what's her real name? Isn't it
Pocahontas?
Pocahontas. You know, she's real happy to have the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau regulate banks, regulate this and that, but I don't think enough thought has gone yet into whether and how Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others may need not necessarily to be regulated, but to disclose to the user before the user becomes a user how valuable the user's information is, so the user can compare.
Wonderful. 26 more pages of the shrink wrap agreement that I'm going to read.
Well, I'm just, or a short, you know, just.
Nobody's going to do it. I think we've got to realize something. To begin with, it's all free. Okay. It's all open. They can do any damn thing they want to. I've agreed to 7 million things. I have no idea. I think I probably agreed to a laparoscopy or something. If anyone ever read one of those shrink wrap agreements, they'd be convinced they had been transported into the outer sphere by aliens, and they were going to. I mean, we're going ahead using it to send grandchildren pictures and to swap with Aunt Madge her latest fantasy about what Trump's doing wrong this week.
Aunt Madge is very active on
I
social
think those
media.
of us who are trying to convey deep matters of incredible intelligence and so forth we're doing it, and it's there, and God bless you, but I don't think the market appreciates it.
No.
I don't think it's not part of the value of what people perceive here, whereas one of Clarice Feldman's recipes using King Arthur flour may have a great deal of recognition in this. So we've lost the news environment we grew up with, okay? We've lost the vehicles for moving the kind of information you prize, as I do, and the ability to get them to market. And we're trying to use social media for this kind of thing, and we're finding there are problems with it. We shouldn't. Okay?
You raise a very interesting point, though, Tom, because if I understood what you were saying correctly, because it's free, there's a certain sort of lower expectation on your part for what the standard should be. But I kind of see that as like the crack sales program, where the first one is free and they suck you in, and then when everyone is relying on it,
okay,
now they turn the screws.
If you want to turn the screws for political purposes, I don't think so.
It seems to be.
I don't think so. I think they're turning the screw. It's more about power than it's about politics. They want to be able to use you for your banking information.
Yeah,
they want to know if you have any DUIs. They want to know all kinds of. They want to slice and dice you with the kind of information that Big Brother wants. Okay.
Well, right.
It's not a matter of politics per politics. It's a matter of total power over every unit and every click. That's the horrible thing about it. Worrying about whether they want to pervert the 2018 election is a very low order compared to worrying about what they're really after when they show by these various grabs they're doing. But there's another solution to this, which I'm going to put up in an article, which I'm writing presently. The answer to all this, what are they really doing? They're saying we have to moderate what's on our pipes to protect our market, because if we don't do it, who will? Okay? Now, why do they have to moderate it? Well, presumably because the law creates two classes of information providing. One is a pipeline, i.e. AT&T. AT&T doesn't get sued if a dirty phone call comes to you, right?
Right.
Then there's the moderator who moderates what comes up, like a newspaper. Something comes across a newspaper that you don't like, you can sue the newspaper. Well, let's take the liability question out of it and see if there's any grounds whatsoever for anybody to shadow ban, to censor, etc. In other words, if every one of these social media, Google, AOL, Twitter, Facebook, have no responsibility for what passes through their pipes, they have no business interfering with what passes through their pipes, right?
That I agree with.
Okay, now what's missing?
A third-party arbitrator.
Nope. Identity. In other words, if I can remember, we have designated Twitter, a real Twitter subscriber. We've got Discus. You can't post on Discus without revealing who you are. Okay?
Oh, you mean a verified Twitter?
A verified.
Right.
We need to put in a verification system throughout the entire internet. We're going to have license plates. These cars can't just careen off other cars.
To eliminate the anonymous actors.
Get rid of the entire anonymous part. You're responsible for your tweets. If you want to say so-and-so did such and such a time and place, fine. Don't call me and ask for a subpoena, Judge. Here's the ID. You get it automatically. Okay?
It's very interesting for me to see the things that you and I agree on and disagree on.
Yeah.
It's quite a spectrum here.
Yeah, I'm totally for IDing everything. I had a big argument with one of the people on, what's it called, the Claremont Review. They'd use an anonymous in putting up something. I said, don't tell me about Publius in the American Revolution who was risking his life in treason against the king. I said, what are you risking? You know, a promotion to full professor? I said, put your goddamn name on it or I'm not going to bother to read what you're writing. And I think we get back, I don't think increasing individual responsibility along with individual liberty is a bad bargain. Our country was founded on it. Let's go back to it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely.
So one of the questions I had on the slides there is an interesting one. I've noticed, you may know Christopher Ruddy.
Yeah, I know Christopher
I've
Ruddy.
never met him, but
For many years.
I find it extremely odd. Maybe you can explain it to the crowd. How does Christopher Ruddy, at the one hand, remain so loyal and donate to the Clinton Foundation? I think $1 to $5 million is the figure. On the other hand, be a member of Mar-a-Lago now and be quite friendly with the president. How do we explain that?
It's called social climbing, Charles.
Okay.
Surely you've seen it before.
Never.
And at the time he was involved with the Clinton Foundation, that was the next new thing.
But to give $1 to $5 million, that's a lot of money.
Well,
I think we also
remember where he got it. Remember where he got his money?
I don't know.
That remarkable Pittsburgh family.
Oh, this case, Mellons.
Yeah, the Mellons. I mean, Christopher he just tacks beautifully. You know, he could just go starboard to port, and he's been tacking his entire life and getting bigger and bigger and richer and richer.
One thing I did notice, our mutual friend, we don't necessarily need to mention his name, but the producer for Bill O'Reilly. I've noticed that Bill O'Reilly is now, I don't know if he's officially working within Newsmax, but he's I believe, doing programming from Newsmax now.
Well, Newsmax, I had a funny conversation with Chris about Newsmax, and I said, I love what you're doing. You've got this channel up that basically consists of 20-year-old historical stories and bios and so forth, and you put it together with an occasional news program. But Chris can't get his arms around the news program, so he had Steve Malzberg on for a while, and then he hasn't got the instincts for a Roger Ailes.
But he hired Michael Clementi, I think.
He may have, but
From
I don't
Fox.
see any effect.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, look at all the talent that's out there. If you can't convert some of these people to TV stars that are radio guys, I don't know if that's how we got all the TV stars from Arthur Godfrey on, right? So it doesn't seem to be Chris's strong. His métier seems to be able to pilot Newsmax, you know, into a fungible thing that lets him live very well, but doesn't create anything very big.
But isn't it particularly strange that he wrote that book about the strange death of Vince Foster and was digging into that more than anybody at all?
Well,
and seemed like an enemy of the
Yeah, but
Clintons.
people at various times of their life are interested in various things. Okay, and Vince Foster was quite interesting. It happens I know a lot about what happened with Vince Foster. And he had some good stuff in there, okay? So he was interested, he dug into it, and then he dug back out, right? And became a big friend of the Clintons.
That's so strange to me.
If you're a climber, it's strange to you that David Brock one day is digging up dirt on the troopers for our friend Bob Terrell at American Spectator, and next thing you know, he's running an anti-Republican conservative.
It's very
Not to
strange
me. These are climbers. They exist in every society. They're looking for their own personal advancement, how they can get more power and more influence.
Well, it also just sort of makes me wonder, did somebody possibly come and visit them and say, hey, do you want to keep going in this direction?
Well, I
and
think
get killed?
it's very simple. David Brock got screwed by Bob Terrell, as did a lot of investors. And he decided to play the other side of the street and see if he could make more money there. And he's got a pretty good analytical mind, and he found, I make a lot more money over here.
Brock, I don't know, I haven't looked into Christopher Ruddy carefully, but David Brock belongs in a prison 40 stories under the,
Really?
the swamp. Oh my God! For what he did with Media Matters, and that we've been over that in prior broadcasts. I mean, I've looked closely at their filings. They're all frauds. I mean, this is an action organization, in reality pretending to be a charity, not filing its paperwork.
That wouldn't surprise me in the least, because the door has been open on that, as you know better than anybody, for quite a few years.
Yeah. Well, speaking of objectionable people, we do have, and I don't know if we could put it up on the screen, this hysterical story about Bill Clinton getting kicked off the New Hampshire fundraising dinner finally because the the Me Too movement has sort of looked at this and said, now, wait a minute.
Yeah, they decided to dig up Eleanor Roosevelt.
But the Democrats are finally turning on Bill Clinton, and it's well past time if you think about it.
Well, they turned on Hillary as well. But that's the way it goes. I mean, they're now going, as we know, way, way left. And the Clintons look like the Tafts as far as they're concerned.
The interesting thing, if you think about Bill Clinton, when he was going through the impeachment trial,
Yep.
he was guilty, guilty, guilty.
Oh, yeah.
They had all the senators wouldn't look at the evidence. You know more about this than I do.
Sure.
And he was given the enormous benefit of the doubt while he was president, after,
Yeah.
for a long, and then Harvey Weinstein comes along. He's, about to go to prison.
Sure.
They may have a trial. They may not need a trial. They may just give up and say, that's it. I'm guilty. What do I get? And no benefit of the doubt to Harvey Weinstein in the recent period, and yet still Hillary and Chelsea can go around with a straight face, having defended and enabled the behavior of her husband and father, respectively. And people take them seriously and still go to fundraising events involving Chelsea and Hillary. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's also New York.
Yeah.
Okay, New York has always been about money. We've had the most unattractive people with dinners honoring them, awards, protector of mankind, friend of children, whatever.
Yeah.
Always here. This town is made up. How can we have 75 fundraising dinners and benefits a year here? And if you look at the people, 80% should have been indicted and in prison.
That's why you have the fundraising.
Yeah, okay.
To stay out of prison.
And so basically, I mean, I stopped being amazed at that 10 years after I came to New York City.
Well, I'm sure I know there are a lot of nasty people in the Republican Party, but Jason and I have found out recently I should have known about this, I think you knew about it, there's an app called My Talking Pet, and you can take a picture of any animal, and then you can cause that animal to say whatever you want it to say. And so I've long thought that the Democratic Party has a wing of it, which I would like to christen the demon rat wing of the Democrat Party. And we're going to get a demon rat, I think, picture.
Well, you've got the union, these unions that use the big rat thing in their.
Yeah, I love that.
Inflatable rat.
You got to get one of those.
That's right. Yeah, we'll get
You
one
want
of
to
those.
look just like one of those.
And you can get it to talk and say anything.
That'd be great. Get one of those. Yeah,
a whole family.
She can show up at the picketing.
Right. Well, we can run. I mean, the royal we can make a short clip, and every time we talk about a Schumer, there's a demon rat visit of him. Anyway, yeah. I also noticed, Tom, and this to me, I'm just amazed. We've had an open FBI investigation into the Clinton Foundation that started January 2016. That was confirmed by the Inspector General report.
Okay.
We know that the IRS has been investigating since July 2016. We also know that it's not that complicated. I mean, it's not like it's a mystery.
You're able to put it together in 10 minutes on every show I've seen so far.
So the question is, how the hell is Bill Clinton in Miami and the Caribbean now soliciting? How is Hillary soliciting contributions for the Clinton Foundation to honor Bill Clinton's forthcoming birthday on August 19th with these two open investigations?
That's not a serious question.
Well,
not a serious question. What legal action has been taken?
my understanding is
What
that,
legal action has
None.
been taken?
well, no, grand juries are open.
On this issue?
Not on this narrow fundraising issue, but on the Clinton Foundation solicitation.
Yeah, but you see, the way it works, and we've seen this with all kinds of people, not just the Clintons. Look at Menendez. I mean, you look at any number of these people. Look at the what were the five out in
Keating 5?
the Keating Five? Was that it?
McCain, you mean?
Yeah, McCain and that group. I mean, nobody touches any of these people unless there's legal action. Okay, and there's no legal action against the Clintons. The Clintons can run around having benefits. Look, can you believe Hillary Clinton went to Harvard and got the highest award
I
from
can
Harvard
actually.
University
I can
this
believe
June.
that. I can believe that.
Okay,
sadly.
with everything we know, okay, that's Harvard University that did that. So in this world, as I said, civil probity is out the window. It's all about power, and it's about two levels of justice. This is how it's operating. So to continually be shocked that it's operating this way, there comes a time when you just simply say, yeah, I got it. I can do Safari and I can do Windows 10 at the same time. I know there are two operating systems here, and I can work under either one of them.
Well, the second link there, Jason, I think has a Twitter, if I'm right,
Which one?
on the one about the Clinton Foundation, sort of in the middle. You had it there. Yeah.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Why is the government authorities allowing? Yeah,
Yeah. Well, you can read that screen.
yeah, I can read this screen.
That screen. Okay. So that's impressive. If you look at the comments section in that tweet.
Well, I called them just yesterday to talk to their PR department.
How'd that go?
They don't answer the phone.
Twitter?
At the Clinton Foundation,
Oh, wow.
101st Street and whatever avenue. They got a great voiceover for their,
Did they ask you for money on the phone?
no.
We're busy now, but if you'd like
Sorry,
to
if
send
you have
money,
a daughter under
go further
16,
down.
we'd love
Am
to
I
have
in
as
the
an
right
intern.
spot?
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
sir?
replies and quotes. You see, this is it's very long, but if you go to this is a tweet that Bill Clinton sent out just now, the last day or so, saying, you know, I'm doing good stuff, and you should be proud of what I'm doing in the Caribbean
Yeah.
to help with the victims of Puerto Rico, and I'm going down there now. Blah blah blah. And there are many, many replies to that quote, including quite a number that say, "You belong in prison." You know, why are you doing this? Hillary needs more money. And even a few of them, I think, said, "Have you read Charles Ortel's work?"
Wow.
So, just sort of amusing. We can let people look
Well,
at
they're
that.
the thing is, even though there's shadow banning and all the rest of this, this is not making Bill Clinton's little heart go pitter patter, is it?
Right. Oh, of course. I mean, he made that. He did that big book with James Patterson. He was going to make a lot of money off that.
Okay.
The
And
president's
the move,
pants are missing.
the president's morals are missing.
Records, his records, his pants, the
Yeah.
indictments, all missing.
But anyway, if we go back into the slide, we're almost done here. I'm having trouble reading it.
Maybe there.
Sorry, yeah, there we go. So another question for you, Tom. Do you think, you know, there are various schools of thought. Do we think that Donald Trump is going to pick things up going against the swamp before the election? Or he's going to just build, hope he holds or increases his position in the House and Senate, and then go more aggressively after the election?
I don't know. I'm a reporter. Okay. You'll have to contact the Psychic Friends Network. I know any number of members of it. Matter of fact, the majority of my friends seem to be members of the
Right.
Psychic Friends Network.
So
I have no idea.
no idea.
There are different ways of playing it.
Right.
And he's got the cards, I don't.
Yeah. I think one thing is pretty clear is that he will, either way, he cannot give the Clintons a pass before the election. That would infuriate.
Give a
his base.
pass when?
Before the election. He can't do that. I
He
mean,
doesn't need to. He doesn't need to do a thing before the election. Look at this Mueller mess going on down at the courthouse here in New York.
it's fun to watch.
Yeah, it really is. And meanwhile, we got the crazy Russian trial, which is just a joke. I mean, what's going well for Mueller?
What, did you ever read Sidney Powell's book?
No.
Licensed to
No,
Lie?
I'd like to.
Yeah, you should read that one.
Okay.
That's a great one because we need to get her on the show as well. She is, I think she's a former prosecutor and longtime Justice Department employee.
She handled herself very well. I really like her.
But she pointed out to me, I forget when her book came out, it might have been 2014, that there's such a disconnect between Mueller's supposed sainted reputation and his actual record. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not his first
She
screw up,
must have read my piece.
which she probably...
The piece I did saying basically that Mueller is really not Inspector Javert, he's really Elmer Fudd. Okay, he's had a rotten record. Almost every case he's won had been teed up by professionals before he got there.
Right.
And everything he's touched has gone kaflooey. including the famous white powder back in 9/11.
Anthrax.
They had the wrong suspect who killed himself, and the right guy got away. I mean, he's really, once again, these are credentialed idiots.
Right.
Okay, we're stiff with them. And I would almost disqualify anyone for being one of the 50 U.S. prosecutors or attorneys in the states if they'd gone to an Ivy League school. I would. North Dakota School of Mines, law school, fine.
You went to the North Dakota School?
That's where I would like them to go. I would like to disqualify Ivy League or East, anyone going to school in the Northeast or the West Coast is excluded from federal employment.
Quinn Michaels and I visited the South Dakota School of Mines.
Well, there's a good school of mines.
See,
okay.
good if you want to.
Sure.
They've developed the lowest friction metal.
Well, there you go. I think it's fine. But I just think that basically we're suffering from a spillover of sewage. We're very big on environmentalism. And the danger doesn't seem to be coming from CO2 or from any of the. We're doing a good job of it. Now we need to clean the intellectual spillage from the elite schools.
I agree.
Because it's destroying everything from the Bar Association to academia.
I think we refer to them as faculty lounge lizards.
There you go. That's very good.
So have you seen John Solomon's latest from last night?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, it was very impressive. John, you probably know him very well.
Yeah.
I got to know him a bit when I was doing small writing for the Washington Times. I was dealing with John. And
Yeah.
I think he's a really good dogged hunter of the truth.
He's doing a fine job. He and Sarah are like two hunting dogs crisscrossing through the cover. But basically, you see, because we don't have good reporting, the New York Times, for example, when I was there, we would do a story like the reality of the handling of the dossier by the FBI. And we'd talk about when it was first introduced, when it's first found in the various records, when it's found in the emails back and forth, the earliest time when it first crept, how it began with the Republicans. We'd do a whole TikTok timeline, the kind that Atkinson does, okay?
Sure,
Then we do an explanatory side. What were the roles of this person, that person, the other person? This would take up a couple of pages because you'd have to put it all together. Now what's happening is two things. One is it's all coming fragmentary.
Right.
It's never coming from the same source twice. You'll get a good piece from Sundance, of all people, over here, and then Pop John Solomon, and then Sarah Carter, and then something weird from Gateway Pundit, and then a revelation from Eugene Volk. Okay, and you got to put it all together.
Right.
So we don't have what we used to have.
Well, it's sort of like the computer that you built.
Well, it is kind of like the computer I built of different parts, none of them made by IBM, but they were compatible under the plan. These are compatible also, but you've got to put them together, and instead of fitting into sockets, you have to make the sockets to fit them. Okay, I've now got to take the news and put the pin holes in to the circuit board so it'll fit. So it's very hard to follow the news and follow the development. And we just saw last weekend what happens. And you've seen the right-wing people have a ball with it. Here the dumbass mainstream media repeated, gee, did Trump go back on his word on what he said happened when the kid had the meeting in Trump Tower with the Russians? Trump totally denied what he said before. He must have lied. Turns out the whole thing's a year-old story, and they couldn't even go to the clips and find out where they're wrong. These people are so bad they can't write a Hume story. There are no Hume stories for them to refer to, and they can't go back to the clips to see this.
What's a Hume story?
Hume story means you put together everything and then you advance the story. Okay. As stories used to move through newspapers, you'd have a Hume story. You'd have the story, okay, the trial has happened with Sirica, and this has happened to Haldeman, Ehrlichman, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be a Hume story. Who are these guys? What happened? How did it come? We're not all the way to the end yet.
Right.
Okay, so it'd be sort of like regaining your balance, and then we advance the story. The next stuff starts to dribble out. Then we do another Cume story and pull it together. None of that happens now. It's all, you're in a news stream.
Right.
Okay. And it's just infuriating. The great poet Wallace Stevens had a great line on this. Wallace Stevens was sick and tired listening to the radio, and he listened to the news, and he suddenly found there was one story the news kept following about a case where the Watusi were trying to kill the whatever the little ones, the pygmies, okay. Then the pygmies are trying to kill the Watusi, and a box score was going on the radio. And Stevens says, I don't give a damn whether the Watusis kill the pygmies or the pygmies kill the Watusi. I don't give a damn about any of it. And he called it the dreadful sundry. Okay, so in the midst of all this stuff we're trying to keep track of, we have to worry about Stormy Daniels and whether Angela Jolie is really not getting the money she's supposed to be getting from Brad Pitt for child support for her menagerie of 17 half-breeds. And, you know, who cares?
You summed it up well. Now, one resource actually that's not really meant to be a news resource is the FBI Vault. And the FBI Vault, I've found, I'm sure you've been into
Yeah,
it.
but you see, the average person wants somebody, you know, to go in Fibber and McGee's closet, as we used to call it, and pull out the 3 things they want. We don't want to go through all the rest of that stuff.
Well, and in the case of the FBI Vault, there are over 10,000 pages in the Hillary R. Clinton, now 24-part dump.
Yeah.
They've only revealed about 2,500 of those pages. And John Solomon's story was great, talking about when the FBI decided to back off from Steele and all that.
Yeah.
And the magic date was October 21st,
Yeah.
which caused me to wonder, now wait a minute, that's right around the time that they swore out the search warrant, October 30th. They waited a long time. They had Huma Abedin's laptop and computer.
Yeah.
Some say from August,
Yeah.
others say early September, and yet they haven't thought to look through this laptop,
Yeah,
which
but
has...
here's a classic case. This is a New York Metro story, okay? Because the cops had it.
Right.
And the papers have got plenty of Metro reporters with cop contacts. And we had this story that the New York Police Department got this by, they weren't looking for it. They were looking into a child molesting case, and they happened across this laptop. Then we got the story that supposedly the FBI had ordered the police department to surrender the laptop to the FBI. When? Nobody's sure exactly when.
Labor Day weekend.
What's that?
It was Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, but we're not sure about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not really sure when the FBI took possession, but supposedly it had to go to the Brooklyn office of the FBI. Okay. Now, then the question is, did the FBI timely inform Washington they had their hands on this, or did it just sit around Brooklyn along with treasured copies of the Best of Penthouse magazine and other things they have there?
Is the FBI looking into that? They just read the articles.
I know you do, and do the chess puzzles. But the point being, nobody is covering this. So now it turns out, and then the early material, the aha was, as we saw in the IG report, gee, why'd the FBI sit on it for all that period of time? Why didn't it look into it? And then there wouldn't have been this embarrassment with the Hillary situation. And now we find out, most recently, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they never did look into it. The FBI has no idea to this day what's on the Huma Abedin laptop.
Well, I think prior to the inauguration, they did not look at it. I think, and to the extent they did, what they did is they came up with search terms on the 650, which
that makes sense.
eliminated the true ability to find out what was wrong. So they constricted the search terms.
But why do we have to speculate about this? The entire shell game being played by the Department of Justice and all its entities in this entire matter is perhaps the most deeply offensive thing about the entire area. And when this game is going to stop and how it's going to stop is something that deeply concerns me.
Yeah, because at a certain point, I remember being involved in something several levels away from the
Sure.
line, but supervising the supervisor of the line.
Yeah.
And you let the lines screw up a little bit, and then you don't fire the line person,
Yeah.
and then you don't fire the supervisor, And it comes a time when you're sitting on top of the whole shooting match, you are responsible.
That's right.
And I fear that we're getting pretty close to that in the president's inaction here.
Well, I don't know what to make of it because I don't know who's playing what game.
Yeah.
And I have no choice but to watch it play out. I have no journalism people in there. What they're able to do is degauss what they can get their hands on. But so much is being excluded, I give them a lot of room to make mistakes. So as an old reporter, I can't really tell you much. I can't weight it. I can't give you odds. It's just, I think we're in terrible peril if there aren't tremendous consequences to this activity to subvert the United States of America and a presidential election. If there isn't, we truly are a banana republic, at which point I start playing the game very differently.
Well, I have just two more subjects to cover.
Okay.
And neither is really all that domestic. One is, I remember back, as I'm sure you do, to the early days of the George W. Bush presidency,
Yeah.
when his first foreign policy crisis was not September 11th. It was when that spy plane was brought down in international airspace by the Chinese,
Yep.
when the Chinese basically started sifting through
Sure.
whatever we couldn't destroy.
Wee,
So that's
Christmas.
2001.
Yeah, it's
Right.
pinata.
2001, and that was before the Chinese economy had invested, I think,
Yep.
some $30 trillion in capital expenditures. We've had umpty-ump warnings prior to the Russian collusion delusion about the threat posed by the Chinese military spying and Chinese hackers and all that kind of stuff. Does it strike you, as it strikes me, that it's incredibly jarring to see these people go on and on and on about the Russian threat, which may exist, and give a pass to Dianne Feinstein and this spy in her office for 20 years, when her husband is such a big investor and has been such a big investor in China for so long?
I think it's much bigger than that. I think that basically the entire Democratic Party has been taking billions of dollars in Chinese under-the-table payments through lobbyists, through political contributions, through fake things like the so-called Chinese, the Zen investments in Clinton presidential campaign. It's been going on a long, long time. So the Democratic Party is basically in the bag for China. So the only villain can be Russia.
Well,
Because the press is, we call them Democrats with bylines. The press is pretty much in the bag with the Democrats. So that's why we hear about Russia.
Well, and I think it's also, to be fair, the Bush wing of the Republican Party, George H.W. Bush, having been one of our early ambassadors to the People's Republic.
Yep.
I think it's that wing too that's in the bag.
Oh, I think so too. I think the Chinese subversion and the accomplices, once again, in this lack of civil probity and this two-level, is these globalists don't see this as treason or subversion. They see it basically as the natural attempt to merge the world economy into one large working thing for the good of the world. That's how they see it.
For the good of the globalists.
Well, they see that as being in our best interest. We're just not smart enough to understand it.
Yeah, I think that's
Which
right.
is where the Council on Foreign Relations began. It was Colonel House who agreed with Woodrow Wilson that basically the American people are too stupid to understand international affairs, so we really have to take it out of their hands as best we can.
Wow. So on the subject of international affairs, one bright spot. I happen to have quite a few Iranian friends, Persian friends, whatever you want to refer to them. Obviously, they're outside of Iran at this point. Trump's attitude with Mattis, with Bolton and others against Iran seems already to be bearing fruit in my mind. And I'm wondering, do you share my optimism that maybe we might turn the page finally after almost 40 years in Iran?
I think we forget that pressure, it's kind of like this good, consistent pressure, which the United States is abysmally bad at, is like a gas. Gases exude pressure in all directions equally. And when they find the slightest entry, they go right through it. Okay. And if you exude the pressure continually, you widen the gaps. And so I am quite optimistic that if Trump is consistent, and it's only 20 months, right, that this will bear fruit. Okay, it's way too early after a couple of demonstrations in the streets and death to the dictator. I mean, but I think just like you, any consistent policy will yield benefits. Do we actually have an administration for the first time in 30 years that can maintain a consistent policy? I don't know. It's not proven yet, but it looks like we're headed in that direction.
Certainly does, and in that light, the spat between Saudi Arabia and Canada is pretty interesting too. Did you see
I
that?
don't understand it. I've seen it and I don't understand it. I'm more interested in the astounding possibility that Putin and Trump are cooking something up that's going to mean peace in the Middle East. Whatever. I mean, who cares if Saudi Arabia gets in a spat with Canada?
Well, in this, as I understand it, it's very promising actually. What happened is Saudi Arabia there was, as you know, a bargain done in 1979, where after the terrorist activities in Saudi Arabia, the king then said, listen, you guys who want to finance terrorism, you can do that outside this country, just not inside Saudi Arabia. Yeah. And so a number of different Saudi pockets and other pockets financed the Muslim Brotherhood.
Of course.
Among other things. This is, as I understand it, the Saudi Crown Prince and the rising powers in Saudi Arabia are spanking Canada for basically continuing to support a Muslim Brotherhood backed activity. And so it's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
The whole madrasa movement, which came out of Saudi Arabia, it's what originally destabilized Afghanistan.
Right.
If we've got Salman singing out of that prayer book, I think it's perfectly wonderful.
Well, it's fascinating if you go back to the first foreign visit of Donald Trump as president. I mean, for him to take that was not exactly a low degree of difficulty trip to go to Saudi Arabia first, then to Israel, then to the Vatican. That signaled that Donald Trump was not going to mess around with, whether we should have a free trade zone in the island of Grenada. I mean, he was taking on the hard tasks.
But it's virtue signaling by the Saudis.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Of course, I like that picture of Trudeau. I knew his mother in Canada.
Who didn't, huh?
Well, I knew her. I thought she had the prettiest panties of any girl in the room.
What is there any credence to the Fidel Castro, Justin Trudeau?
No, timing's all off.
Is it?
Yep.
What about? Let me just. There's a picture of Justin Trudeau's mother and Justin Trudeau with Castro. Look at this. Have you seen this one?
Well, why not? I'm not saying he never boffed her. I just think it's unlikely he's the father. I mean, how would you know?
What you just said dramatically increases the odds.
Well, I don't think. I mean, have men picked up pretty babies of girls they wanted to get in the sack before? Only a zillion, quadrillion times.
But that's actually Justin Trudeau, right?
That is Justin Trudeau, and he looks a hell of a lot like Fidel Castro.
He's not smart enough to be Fidel Castro's son.
Well,
you've got a more recent picture of him, right? Yeah, there you go.
Here.
I mean, these things are fun. I'm not against.
Look at that.
There's a remarkable.
When I looked through all the dates and stuff, it didn't work. Okay, which is not to say that she hadn't been down there a million times and had a wonderful vacation. Okay, but she was perfectly capable of aborting anything she wanted to abort.
But, I mean, I'm just saying, look at these two guys.
Okay, fine. Go right ahead. Once again, you'll have to speak to the Psychic Friends Network. I looked at the dates; they didn't work. But I'm perfectly, willing to entertain the possibility of Margaret Trudeau and Fidel Castro having their names inscribed in a palm tree somewhere down in Cuba.
I'll continue looking into it.
So Tom, other than your book on Rudolf Hess, are there other projects that you're engaged in? You want to tell us about?
I'm doing a play. I'm the guy who published Che Guevara's diary when Che got killed down in Bolivia.
Mm-hmm.
I went down and along with every other news representative of the country, and we actually got the diaries from the Bolivian government.
Wow.
So I published them, which left in my mind, after I'd done it, it was a fascinating exercise. The first thing I learned in reading them was that far from being the great guerrilla warrior of all time, Che was one of the biggest screw-ups I'd ever seen in my life. And this whole thing in Bolivia was absurd. I mean, you want to get yourself killed, he did it right. It didn't take him long either. So then I got interested in basically the question of why he didn't bug out of there. So I sat with a CIA agent who had been the guy who issued the order to kill Guevara.
Felix?
Felix.
Rodriguez? What's his last name? Was it
Rodriguez.
Yeah.
So I sat with Felix, and we spent a lot of time together. So I'm writing a play called The Passion and Death of Saint Che. It's the last 24 hours of Che Guevara's life, in which all is revealed: how he was caught, how he died, and whether, in effect, he was sent to his death without his knowing it.
Did Felix Rodriguez have his hands in a jar on his desk, as is claimed?
Oh, Felix gave the order.
But didn't he like chop off his hands or something?
No, the Bolivians did that. Bolivians chopped off his hands. This was all under the Bolivian armed forces. At the time, Bolivia was governed by an Air Force general whose name was Barrientos. And so the Estado Mayor, the general staff of Bolivia, was getting its jollies by being the pursuer of this group of barbudos, bearded men, invaders. Because the irony was that, unlike most guerrilla wars, Che Guevara had decided to go into a country which was totally made up of Indians, and its government was made up of Indians, and its general staff and its army and its police were all Indians, and claimed to be the liberators, these tall, white, bearded Cubans. They were the liberators on behalf of the working
Indians.
Farmers and Indians. And the Indians thought they were out of their minds. So the Indians communicated every move they made to their brother-in-law in the police department, who talked to his brother-in-law, who was a sergeant in the army, and every move they made was plotted. So this was just dumber than hell. And I enjoyed following it. And Felix was terrific in giving me the inside story.
And was
That's
Felix,
Felix.
was he involved in Operation 40 in the CIA?
What do you mean?
That Operation 40, the 40 assassins within the CIA?
I don't think so. No,
And-
he was a Cuban, naturalized American, served in the army, our army, and had been involved in the Bay of Pigs, where he was a radio operator in country.
Right.
Okay. But Felix was basically, he did a number of operations, but they weren't assassin operations. They were military operations. He was quite good at them. He did one in Vietnam, did another one, I think, in Central America. I don't know if it was Nicaragua or Honduras, someplace like that. Very, very good. He would have been wasted in an assassination operation.
So we don't think Felix Rodriguez had anything to do with the JFK assassination?
No, not in a million years. He was way too gung-ho at that stage.
Well, I do, not to go off on a tangent, but I do want to ask you a question about this image, because while I don't disagree that organized crime was pivotal in the assassination of JFK, I feel that there was more there. And when we see, like for instance, we had this statement by Donald Trump. We're just waiting for this to load. Okay. So we've got this image from the motorcade, this very famous image of JFK. And of course, we've heard Donald Trump speak about Rafael Cruz being outside the International Trade Mart in New Orleans in 1960. This is him right here with Antonio Veciano, standing right there, feet away from the motorcade seconds before the shots were fired. I mean, Antonio Veciano started Alpha 66, the militarized Cuban freedom fighting. So, I mean, don't we think some of these anti-Castro Cubans, including Felix Rodriguez, might have been involved in?
No, because it's a question of what his assignments were. He wasn't an anti-Castro Cuban per se. He had an assignment from the CIA. Okay, the Che thing he was sent on, which he was happy about, although he didn't like his superiors much down that were assigned there. But he liked it because he could get even for the Bay of Pigs. That's how he was getting even for the Bay of Pigs, okay? This kind of thing, I mean, a lot of people wanted to see JFK go by, okay? I don't believe all these pictures. Some of them are strange and interesting. It's very hard, I go with the criminal thing because there's so much evidence, okay? It's clear to me that poor Oswald was absolutely right. He was the patsy, okay? And that the Ruby strike is exactly what happened to Joey Colombo at Columbus Circle, which you may remember. He was the Italian Anti-Defamation League guy who got killed, and the guy who killed him got killed 1 second later. So all that makes sense to me. Who else was involved? Who else the mob had involved in it? Whether there was spillback to the CIA. I saw no evidence of it, and I was inside. I mean, when I'm talking about this mob lawyer, Frank Regano, you read his book?
I have not.
You need to.
What's the title of the book?
Mob Lawyer.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Got a catchy
Frank
title.
Regano.
So this image here of Rafael Cruz, they say not really.
Yeah.
But actually, Ralph Sinkay did a very extensive photogrammetric study of Rafael Cruz, and I do believe this is him. And he's standing right here with Lee Harvey Oswald outside the International Trade Mart in New Orleans, handing out these Fair Play for Cuba flyers, which that was a CIA operation. That was a honeypot operation to find communists, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I'm not sure Oswald knew that.
Well, the Riley Coffee Company was an obvious front. What's her name? Judith Very Baker tells us that Oswald knew he was working for the CIA.
I think Oswald was working for the CIA. I think he's getting paid by the CIA. That's why they don't want to release all that information.
Well,
okay?
his 1040s are still classified.
That's right, and I think there's no doubt about it. And who was zooming who, I don't know. Okay, but Putin knows.
Why do you say that with a smile?
Because I think there's a lot of information that's going to get shared the next year or two.
Huh.
I had an interesting situation. I published a book by Howard Baker. You remember, when did the president know? When did he know it?
Right.
And I said to Howard, Howard, you owe me one. I said, if I were the president of the United States, the new one, I'd come in, I'd sit down, I'd try the chair out, and 5 minutes later, I'd call somebody and see who killed JFK, right? I said, so I assume Richard Nixon, of all people, would have wanted to know who the hell killed JFK.
So we agree on this, that the Watergate break-ins were more about information related to the Kennedy assassination than George Wallace?
No, we don't.
No, okay.
I think it's highly likely that the Watergate break-in was a trap.
For Nixon,
for Nixon, and the Republicans fell right into it. Okay, and that Dick Helms was up to his neck in it, as were the Democrats.
So, but to clarify, you mean the CIA set a trap for Nixon with the Watergate?
No, the
break-in?
CIA didn't need to set a trap. Their own guys got clobbered. Okay, they weren't happy about that.
Well, who set the trap?
I think basically it was set by Helms. It was set by people in the CIA, but not the CIA per se.
Okay.
Helms hated Nixon. That's why Nixon's fatal mistake was going to Helms to get the CIA to take the FBI off the trail. Dumbest thing he could possibly have done. And remember, I published Haldeman's best-selling book on Watergate.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many fascinating topics for us to discuss. Watergate is certainly one of them.
Well, I hope you can cut a show out of this.
Yeah. Well, it's going out live right now, so
Okay.
whatever we've got is what we've got. I know I've been kind of taking it in all kinds of directions that Charles might not
no,
like.
it's a privilege to have this time with you, Tom, and be able to ask you questions from all sorts of perspectives. And we really appreciate it.
How are we with the slides,
We're
Charles?
done.
Done with the slides?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, was there anything else you guys wanted to discuss?
I'm available. Sorry, I'm allergic to something here in the room. I don't know what it is, but it's making me sniffle.
Possibly dust. I need to clean up a bit.
It's not
Yeah,
a cat. We know that.
Not a cat. People were speculating that it might be Charles's cologne, but I don't
No, I
think
don't
Charles is
wear
wearing
cologne.
Yeah,
cologne.
they're not Charles Cologne.
Well, we definitely want to thank you for joining us, Tom, and people can definitely reach you through the email address there provided by Charles. And is there anything that, other than the book, that you'd like to direct people to?
No, I just continually write articles. I'm not in the right-wing blogs. I try to stay in more or less the middle of the road. So you'll usually find me at places like Real Clear Politics, or even the Wall Street Journal, or USA Today, or a wonderful news site called American Greatness that I love being in. But if anybody's got any questions, they can contact me.
And you did mention our mutual friend Clarice Feldman, who writes for the American Thinker.
Yeah, she does a wonderful column.
Oh, wait a minute. I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about this. Peter W. Smith.
Ah, yes, Peter W. Smith, yes.
So what sort of insights can you give us as far as what you might feel Peter was onto, and do you believe he committed suicide in the way described?
Okay, well, why don't you break it down question by question, and I'll answer
Well,
question
Peter
by
Smith
question.
was found
I don't
in a
do
hotel
I don't do
room.
tour d'horizon.
Part of the problem that I have with so many of these things is that the evidence doesn't match the conclusion. They say that the guy went to Walmart, purchased a canister of helium, and inhaled it and killed himself. But in the hotel room, there are 2 canisters of helium. And I went to that hotel. He had no rental car there. He had no car that he owned there.
Yeah,
We don't know if he took a taxi. Possibly he could have.
probably did. Why, you wouldn't need to keep a car there because you weren't likely to use it again, right?
Well, right, but it's the type of town that a guy from Chicago, I mean, was Peter unable to drive? I certainly wouldn't go to that town without a rental car. Stuff is all...
I think you have to go back to what you think he was doing to answer those questions, rather than look at them as isolated phenomena.
What do you think he was doing?
I think he was collecting an insurance policy, the last asset his family had, after he'd blown through $23 million he'd made 20 years earlier.
So you believe that he did commit suicide?
Absolutely.
And the fact that Jonathan Safran is so difficult to contact and locate, and is a young guy who's building his career but is basically uncontactable, and his LinkedIn profile is out of date. All the companies that LinkedIn says he worked at have no idea who he is. It's very strange, isn't it?
I've talked to people who've been in touch with him. And,
With Jonathan?
Safran. I think Safran was both used by Smith and used Smith, okay? And I think that whatever he was involved with and whatever he benefited from, he's disappeared with.
Jonathan Safran has
Yeah.
disappeared with.
Very strange kid.
Yeah,
He
to
was
say
a law
the
student.
least. Well, right, and all of the stuff with Matt Tate and the Lawfare blog,
Yeah.
and the interviews that were done by.
Yeah, well, this is all Safran's doing,
How is it Safran's doing?
because he was the intermediary for Peter in basically answering the questions for him, talking all that inappropriate stuff that went to the Wall Street Journal,
Right.
and then got off. First we knew about it. You told me that you'd been contacted by the Wall Street Journal, and I was totally puzzled because, as far as I knew, and I knew Peter pretty well for a long time, for 15 years. I watched this construction in his head as he began to say, maybe I can get my hands on from the dark web using this intermediary or that intermediary, the 30,000, 60,000, you name it, emails. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, Peter's latest thing. Peter had this long-standing desire to be a cloak and dagger man in the world of political operations. He had had a derogatory investigatory team at the Democratic National Convention in the previous presidency. He'd spent a lot of time on it. He'd financed the Troopergate investigation. So I don't know how many of these things he was involved in. I wasn't really interested.
Yeah, neither.
Okay, and I'm sure you weren't either, and he would want to gas on about this one or that one. So when it got down to well, I think I found a way of getting it. I'm not sure I can do it, but I'm going to try. And he'd go this way and that way. He'd tell me this name and that name and the other name. And I actually met one of the people involved in this thing once at a lunch in New York. And we were all scratching our heads. So the idea that he bit into a external guy that he was going to hire maybe if the guy would do X, Y, and Z, and the guy went rogue on him, didn't surprise me at all. He wasn't handling this with any address that I could see, any smarts. He wasn't leaving a cutout. He was saying something smart to me. He was saying, I don't know if I can ever get this, and if I get it, I don't know if I can ever stand behind it and actually claim it's real. He said, I've got a lot of doubts about this whole process. That's the first smart thing he'd said to me about this process. So I took it for granted that the deal was over and failed. Then Charles calls and tells me, congratulations, you and I are advisory committee
That's
members
right, we're the same
of
level.
some, what was it, a 501c3?
No, it was an LLC.
LLC. We have whatever liability accrues to us as being advisory members of a board of directors of an LLC company. I said, what?
Yeah, I never-
And you went, what? So now I realized, having been in the venture capital end of the world for a while, it looks to me like somebody had to pull together a prospectus pretty fast for an investor with a lot of phantom names on it that he figured wouldn't get in trouble because he'd come to his lawyer and say, hey, I'm sorry I used your name, Charles. I'm sorry I used your name, Tom. I didn't have a chance to call you. The operator, it was too good, and I knew you knew what I was doing.
And it's no liability to you. You're an advisor director. Don't worry
Exactly.
about it.
And he would give him the usual, and you know, he would have been right, but I still would have been mad because I don't like becoming advisory members of things I don't advise, and I don't agree to advise. So that's where I was. So when he committed suicide, then I looked into it and found he was down to his last penny. And he hadn't even told his own family. And all he had left was $1.5 million insurance policy, and he was well beyond the 1 year suicide deadline or whatever they have on policies like that. So this was an estate payoff. He had no reason to kill him. He didn't have anything. You know, he would have told me if he'd had something and he couldn't use it, or he told me something he was going to use it. He had all kinds of plans. But you talked to him the day before he died, and you thought he sounded pretty chipper and terrific. But he always sounded, I never heard him sound dejected in my life, not once.
Well, the one thing that is, there are many things that are odd about this, and I think, I want to think about the case a bit more before I come to a conclusion.
Sure.
Is that in the timeline from memory, Comey was fired when? May 7th?
Yeah,
And Smith dies May 13th, 14th?
yeah, something like that.
And the special counsel gets appointed May 17th? And
May 9th.
was it May 9th?
Yeah.
May 9th, yeah. And then, so Smith dies the weekend, the Sunday, and Rosenstein appoints Mueller, what was that day? Was that the?
So May 14th, Peter Smith dies.
Yeah. And the thrust of what the Wall Street Journal reporter told me, and I never actually saw any of these legal agreements. I don't know if you saw
Never
them.
did.
5/17.
The 17th. So what they were trying to do, I think, we're going to find out that what the small group and the people in Justice and the FBI were trying to do is manufacture or embellish the argument that the Trump team was involved colluding to affect the election. And here you have Peter W. Smith in the September timeframe, of 2016, very actively involved trying to chase down the missing emails, and also meeting with representatives of foreign, not necessarily governments, but foreign parties that said they had these emails off the dark web. So I'd like to know.
Well, here's what's wrong with that scenario, in my opinion. In April, Peter started talking to me about health problems.
Oh, okay.
Okay, just before any of this timeline you just gave me.
Right.
Okay, he said, I'm not well. I've got to go see some docs and see what's happening. So I got a whole build-up about this, and then it was going to involve the Mayo Clinic. And I think, why the Mayo Clinic? I mean, you're in Chicago, for God's sake. You have the best hospitals outside of New York in the world. Got to go to Rochester. So this whole build-up I start getting in April is that he's in sick health, but no, he's not going to tell me. He doesn't want to cry on my shoulder, etc. So I think this plot was, he was running out of runway. And whatever the hell, I don't think he found anything out. I think he was desperate. I think he was looking for help. I think he may have said stuff to the guy down in the advisory people. And he probably got dumbass Jonathan, what's his name, Safran, all excited, being a young kid who doesn't know beans about anything, thinks he's on a big deal. And I think he cost me a lot of money.
Peter
Smith, yeah.
How so?
He gave me something to invest in that turned out was just embezzled.
Really?
Yep, really.
What was that?
That's all I'm going to say.
Got it. Right. So the things that I found so strange were this whole sort of transmedia campaign that was.
And I wasn't the only one. I found other people had the same problem.
Really?
So not only was he getting it from his own fortunes, it's people he inveigled into things like that.
Oh boy, bless you.
Now I'm allergic to
now
my
you're
own
You're
apartment.
allergic to your own house stuff.
You're both allergic to me, I guess.
The thing that I found so strange was this sort of transmedia campaign that Benjamin Wittes put together with the tick, 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 boom. And he had these slow motion videos of a cannon firing, and he coordinated it with a Shane Harris interview on Rachel Maddow, while there was also a Shane Harris interview on Lawfare blog with Matt Tate.
Yeah.
And Matt Tate was working at GCHQ at one point in his life.
I think they
and
thought they had
Google
something.
Project Zero at one point in his life.
But what's the point?
Oh, I don't know. but
Well,
it just-
that's what I'm saying. These guys are, at that point, nobody knew what even the allegations were on the grand Trump collusion.
I just find it very curious that a person from GCHQ and Google Project Zero would be involved in this multimedia campaign that is publishing things that seem to be directly contradicted by emails that Charles received that these guys don't know about. So I feel like they're lying.
Well,
is what I'm getting at.
they probably were. I don't know what they even said. I haven't seen this stuff.
Well, this isn't it. This is just his current
Okay,
Twitter feed. We
but
did We did a show in Rochester where we went over some of this stuff, and we had prepared it and laid it out, and when you look at it at all, it appears very strange. Then we had that guy Joe Rago from the Wall Street Journal get killed, who was investigating Hillary emails. I just feel like there wasn't nothing there.
Well, I think the Peter Smith thing is a dry hole. I'd be delighted to dig into it and find otherwise. You know, I'm not adverse to that. It's just I think I was cued in on absolutely everything going on there, and I think these assorted newsies blew smoke up their own asses and created a big frisson. I've shot them down rather brilliantly for an article I wrote, but I got spiked because it turned out the editor-in-chief of the place I was writing for was buddies with whoever the Wall Street Journal guy was.
Shane Harris?
Shane Harris.
Really?
They'd both been on the National Interest or National Journal together at one point.
So you wrote an article that said what about Shane Harris?
I said basically that he was making allegations that were not supported by the facts.
I agree with that.
What's that?
I agree with that.
No, I mean, there was absolutely, he was all these people that supposedly were part of this conspiracy. I called Tom Fitton. I said, Tom, did you know you were a member of the advisory board? He said, hell no.
Actually, that Wall Street Journal contact came at our first meeting.
Yeah, that was Shane Harris.
The first time I met him, we were down at the at the World Trade Center area doing an interview outdoors, and my phone rang, and it was Shane Harris. And Peter Smith had asked me to get in contact with Shane Harris, and I immediately did. And whenever he asked me to do it, like much earlier, now he calls with a story saying, we're going to publish this imminently. That you're on the advisory board of X, Y, and Z, and there are a lot of very famous people on this advisory board. For the life of me, I can't understand why you would be on it. It's the opening sentence is like,
kind of. Whoever.
Are you like
the same script for 6 phone calls, right?
are you a people person by you?
Yeah, but so basically they were running with nothing. Right. Shane Harris thought his story was he'd found a conspiracy.
Right.
And what I did with my story was to prove he hadn't spoken to one of the people that he had in a headline listed as being part of the conspiracy.
Right.
Now, I thought that was a good story.
I think he
so
was
did a
part
lot of other
conspiracy.
people. But I couldn't get them to publish it. I mean, I broke my heart. I really worked hard on that.
Well, it was odd as well that story immediately, his story, he was working for the Wall Street Journal, not part of MSNBC.
Yeah, sure.
Immediately he's on that night, or very quickly.
Well, they don't. That's okay. This is all shelf promotion. Good for him. Okay. Right. I like to see a journalist get promoted.
But it wasn't just that. It was that and the simultaneous podcast on Lawfare with the guy from GCHQ and Google Zero and this guy Jonathan.
Well, but GCHQ is behind the entire thing.
Correct. That's why I find it so curious.
Well, anything they could do to get the ball rolling a little faster was fine with them. I mean,
when you say they were behind the whole thing, you're talking about the Steele dossier, the let's end the Trump presidency.
The entire pre-hurricane, whatever the hell it was.
Crossfire hurricane.
What is it?
Crossfire hurricane.
Crossfire hurricane. The crossfire hurricane golden line is what, July 31st?
I think
and
so.
all this stuff was happening in England from like February on. That was a GCHQ ignition.
Yeah, and I think Matt Tate is still a GCHQ operative.
What's that?
I think Matt Tate is still a GCHQ operative.
Oh,
I'm very curious
I don't know whether
about
he is
Google
or he is.
Project Zero.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm very curious about his involvement in the death of Peter Smith.
No, I don't think he has anything to do with that. Peter Smith killed himself for his own financial stuff. Everybody, I know a lot about that. And I've been sworn to silence because it has to do with the family and their estate and all kinds of other stuff. But I don't have no question Peter Smith played us all for fools.
Where did he get the second helium tank?
Oh, I don't give a shit.
But
I really don't. I mean, what if he got 2? Maybe there's a special on 2 for the price of 1 that day.
Someone from Walmart emailed me from their inventory system. There was only 1 in stock.
Yeah, okay.
So where did he get it?
I have no idea. And Because basically, there are times when you have to look at what really matters, and the other stuff is just, it's signal-to-noise ratio. It's just noise. You know, I don't see it being material to the facts of the case. I've got details, witnesses, money, timing, all kinds of stuff. And another helium tank, I haven't gone and checked that out myself, so I don't know that it's true. Okay, I take your word for it that you have, but that isn't. It does. I've got such a preponderance of evidence going in the other direction that chasing down a likely explanation for an unlikely thing like that is just not my priority at this particular moment. Let's put it that way.
But on the GCHQ thing,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's important because important because I have shared this with you, Charles. I truly believe that the entire Russian collusion thing is a GCHQ operation.
Absolutely.
And I believe that stupid Brennan was the sucker who ran with it.
yeah,
And everything that happened was because Brennan thought, the reason they didn't bother to check the dossier, they thought their good friends at GCHQ wouldn't stick them with something that hadn't been verified.
right.
That's the explanation. You know, I think the people we thought were the evil architects of this coup are schmucks that were had, who thought they were being patriots, that their good friends at GCHQ had tipped them off to the worst threat America had ever had, and they had an opportunity to stop it, and they were going to do everything they could because the fate of their... I think they thought they were being patriots. I really do. I now look at this thing totally differently.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about
Poor
motive,
Comey. I don't think Brennan told Comey, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. I don't think Comey asked for explanations. I don't think Comey did anything but follow orders from the Clintons, from the Obama administration, and from Brennan. I think he was an even bigger schmuck than Brennan.
that's saying something.
James
Dopey James Comey.
Yeah.
But if you look at Britain and you look at the motive of the pro-globalist wing in Britain.
Well, GCHQ did not want Brexit.
Right,
And if Trump came in, Brexit was more, not less likely.
right.
If they could get U.S. intelligence to be dumb enough to do their dirty work for them, so much the better. And boy, did they ever.
Amazing.
Tom, the comments here on YouTube are asking what the lapel pin is right there.
That's for jumping out of perfectly good airplanes.
Oh yeah? Oh, it's a paratrooper pin?
Yeah.
You were an Army veteran. I don't know if
Yeah,
we covered
yeah.
that. Very nice.
When did you stop doing that?
As soon as they stopped paying me.
There you go.
You know, Charles did a halo drop.
No, Charles did not do a halo drop.
I'll tell you, so when I came to New York first, some friends said, do you want to go skydiving? And I said, what's that? They said, well, you go over to Teterboro and you climb in a plane and then you jump out, free shoot. I'd never been in a free shoot in my life. We always had static lines that opened it for you. They didn't think we were bright enough to open our own chutes. At any rate, so I said, yeah, that sounds terrific. I said, how much do they pay me? They said, what do you mean, how much do they pay me? You pay them. I said, oh no, you can get killed doing that.
I'm just showing the classic image, Mission Trump possible. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for spending the time with us here today. It's been very informative. I think people can really look forward to reading the Rudolf Hess book. And was there anything else you wanted to leave us with before we wrap it up for this afternoon?
No, enjoyed it and wish you all the best of luck.
Welcome back anytime.
And thank you, Charles, as always. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see everybody tomorrow. We've got the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on Patreon.